The blood from the stagecoach accident pooled dark and terrible in the New Mexico dust, and when Catherine Hayes opened her eyes to see her legs twisted beneath the overturned carriage, she knew with absolute certainty that her life had just shattered as completely as the bones in her spine. It was September 1878, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the wreckage scattered across the desert road between Santa Fe and Albuquerque. Catherine could hear screaming, distant and muffled, before she realized the sounds were coming from her own throat. Pain radiated through her body in waves so intense that darkness kept threatening to pull her under, but something in her refused to surrender to unconsciousness. She was 22 years old, traveling west to start a new life as a schoolteacher in a small town called Silver Ridge, and she had survived too much already to let death claim her on a dusty road in the middle of nowhere. "Hold on, miss, just hold on." The voice cut through her agony, deep and steady, anchored by a calm that seemed impossible given the chaos surrounding them. Catherine's vision swam as she tried to focus on the face above her, a man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a dusty black hat and a bandana around his neck, and his hands were gentle despite their size as they moved to assess her injuries. "My legs," Catherine gasped, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. "I cannot feel my legs." The cowboy's jaw tightened, but his expression remained steady. "Name's James Cordell. I was riding past when I heard the crash. Don't you worry none, we're going to get you help." 3 other passengers had been on the stagecoach. The driver lay motionless 20 feet away, his neck bent at an angle that told its own grim story. An elderly merchant sat propped against a rock, clutching a wounded arm and muttering prayers in Spanish. A young woman in a torn green dress wandered in circles, in shock but seemingly unharmed. But Catherine was trapped, pinned beneath the weight of the overturned coach, and when James tried to move her, the screaming started again. "The axle broke," the merchant managed to say in accented English. "We hit a rut and the whole thing just came apart. Horses ran off." James worked quickly, using a piece of timber as a lever to lift the coach enough to pull Catherine free. Every movement sent fresh agony through her body, and by the time he had her clear, she was only barely conscious. He laid her as gently as possible on a blanket he pulled from his saddlebag, and when he examined her legs, Catherine saw something flicker across his face that terrified her more than the pain. "How bad?" she whispered. James met her eyes and she saw the truth there before he spoke. "I don't know, miss, but we need to get you to a doctor right away." His horse, a sturdy roan gelding, stood grazing nearby, remarkably calm despite the carnage. James fashioned a travois from branches and rope, working with practiced efficiency while the merchant kept watch over the 2 women. The young woman in the green dress had finally stopped wandering and sat weeping quietly. The driver was dead, there was no question about that, and they would need to send someone back for his body. "Silver Ridge is 10 miles south," the merchant said. "But Santa Fe is closer, maybe 7 miles back the way we came." "Silver Ridge has a doctor," James said. "Doc Morrison, he's good, used to be an army surgeon. We go south." Catherine wanted to protest that she could not possibly endure 10 miles of travel in her condition. But before she could form the words, James had lifted her onto the travois with such care that she almost believed she might survive this after all. He secured her with rope so she would not slide, placed his canteen within her reach, and then mounted his horse. "I'll send help back for you folks soon as we reach town," he told the merchant. "Stay with the coach, keep in the shade. Should be someone along this road before nightfall." The journey to Silver Ridge was a blur of pain and dust, and the rhythmic plodding of the horses' hooves. Catherine drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes waking to find James looking back at her with concern etched deep in his weathered face, sometimes waking to nothing but the endless blue sky above and the certainty that she was going to die out here in this merciless wilderness. Once she woke to find they had stopped and James was giving her water, his hand supporting her head with surprising gentleness. Almost there, he said quietly. You're doing real good, Miss Hayes. Just hold on a little longer. How do you know my name? The words came out barely above a whisper. You were holding your papers when I pulled you out. Saw the teaching contract from Silver Ridge. That's my town you were heading to. Silver Ridge appeared like a mirage in the late afternoon heat. A collection of wooden buildings clustered along a single main street, with houses scattered on the outskirts and the dark shapes of mine entrances visible in the hills beyond. James did not stop at the doctor's office. Instead, he rode straight through town, the travois bouncing behind him while people stopped to stare and point. Catherine was past caring about the spectacle she made. She was past caring about anything except the hope that this Doc Morrison could do anything, to stop the pain. The doctor's office was a small white building at the far end of town, with a hand-painted sign swinging from a post out front. James was off his horse before it had fully stopped, lifting Catherine with both arms and carrying her through the door without bothering to knock. Doc, need you now. A man in his 50s, gray-haired and spectacled, looked up from the papers on his desk. His eyes widened at the sight of Catherine's bloodied and broken form, but like James, he moved with practiced calm, clearing his examination table with one sweep of his arm and directing James to lay her down. Stagecoach accident on the Santa Fe road, James said quickly. Whole coach overturned. She was pinned underneath. Says she cannot feel her legs. Doc Morrison's hands moved over Catherine's body, gentle but thorough, and she saw his expression grow more grave with each passing moment. He lifted her eyelids, checked her pulse, pressed carefully along her spine. When he reached her legs, he pulled a pin from his vest and touched it to her foot. Do you feel that, miss? Catherine watched the pin press against her skin and felt nothing at all. No. He moved the pin higher to her ankle. This? No. Higher still to her calf, her knee, her thigh. It was not until he reached the middle of her thigh that Catherine finally gasped and jerked away. I felt that hurt. Doc Morrison removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, and Catherine knew he was buying time to figure out what to say. When he finally met her eyes, his expression was kind but honest. What's your name, miss? Catherine Hayes. I was coming to teach at the school here. Well, Miss Hayes, I'm going to be straight with you because you deserve the truth. You've got significant damage to your spine, likely around the lower vertebrae. The fact that you have some sensation in your upper legs is a good sign, means the spinal cord isn't completely severed. But the damage is severe. What does that mean? Catherine's voice was steady despite the terror rising in her chest. It means you're lucky to be alive. It means the next few days are going to be critical and we need to keep you absolutely still while the swelling goes down. And it means. He paused, choosing his words carefully. It means you'll likely never walk right again, Miss Hayes. Even with the best outcome, you're looking at months of recovery and you'll probably need crutches or a cane for the rest of your life. Worst case, you may not walk at all. The words hung in the air between them, brutal in their finality. Catherine felt something break inside her that had nothing to do with bones or nerves. She had come west to start fresh, to leave behind the suffocating expectations of her family in Boston, to build a life of her own choosing. And now, in the space of a single afternoon, all of that had been ripped away. I understand, she heard herself say, though she did not understand at all. Thank you for your honesty, Doctor. James, who had been standing silent by the door, stepped forward. What can we do for her? Right now. Keep her comfortable, manage the pain, pray the swelling goes down without causing more damage. I'll need to set the broken bones in her left leg that at least I can do something about. But the spine, he shook his head. That's beyond my skill, beyond any doctor's skill. The body has to heal itself if it's going to heal at all. She was coming here to teach, James said. She's got no one in town, no place to stay. We'll keep her here for now. I've got a back room she can use. Doc Morrison was already preparing supplies, pulling out bottles and bandages and instruments that gleamed sharp in the lamplight. This is going to hurt, Miss Hayes. I'm sorry, but there's no way around it. I'm going to give you something for the pain first, but you're still going to feel it." The next hours were a special kind of hell. Doc Morrison gave her laudanum that made the world soft and distant, but did not stop the agony when he set the broken bones in her leg and wrapped her in bandages tight enough to restrict any movement. She screamed until her voice was raw, and through it all, James stayed. He held her hand when Doc Morrison told her it was all right to squeeze, and he wiped the sweat from her forehead with his bandana, and when it was finally over and she lay trembling and sobbing on the table, he was still there. "You can go," Catherine whispered. "You have done more than enough." "Don't seem right to leave you alone," James said simply. "You do not even know me. Know you're brave, know you're strong, that's enough for now." Doc Morrison moved Catherine to the back room once she was stable enough to be moved. It was small and spare, with a single bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out onto the scrubby hills beyond town. James carried her there, and Catherine was too exhausted to protest or feel embarrassed about being dependent on this stranger. He laid her on the bed as carefully as if she were made of glass, and Doc Morrison propped her up with pillows and adjusted her position until she was as comfortable as someone in her condition could be. "I'll check on you through the night," the doctor said. "You need anything at all, you call out." "My room is just across the hall." "Thank you," Catherine managed. James stood awkwardly by the door, hat in his hands. "I should go see to my horse. Send someone back for those folks at the accident site too, but I'll come by tomorrow if that's all right, see how you're doing." "You do not have to do that. Didn't say I had to, said I would." After he left, Catherine lay staring at the ceiling as darkness fell outside her window. The laudanum made everything feel distant and unreal, but it could not touch the despair that was settling into her bones. She thought of the teaching position she would never fill, of the children she would never instruct, of the independent life she had imagined for herself that now seemed as impossible as flying to the moon. She thought of her mother back in Boston, who had warned her that going west was dangerous and foolish, and how she would probably never even learn about the accident, would spend months wondering why Catherine's letters had stopped coming. Tears slid silently down her temples and into her hair, and Catherine let them fall. She had earned the right to grieve for everything she had just lost. James Cordell had been born in Texas 28 years ago and had spent most of his life on horseback, working cattle drives and riding shotgun for freight companies, and doing whatever jobs a man with his particular skills could find on the frontier. He had never stayed long in any one place until 3 years ago, when he had drifted into Silver Ridge looking for work, and had somehow never left. The town was small but growing, supported by a silver mine that was still producing decent ore, and James had found steady employment as a ranch hand at the Double Bar S, a cattle operation owned by a man named Samuel Hutchinson. The work was hard but honest, and James liked the country around Silver Ridge, the way the mountains rose purple and imposing to the east, the way the desert bloomed with unexpected color after the rare rains. He liked the people too, or most of them anyway. It was a rough town, full of miners and cowboys and the kind of folks who came west because they did not fit anywhere else, but there was a fundamental decency to most of them that James appreciated. He had not been looking for anything when he came across the stagecoach accident. Had just been riding back from checking on a line shack in the northern section of the ranch when he heard the crash and the screaming. Helping had been instinct, not heroism, and James felt uncomfortable with the way folks in town started treating him like he had done something special. He had done what anyone would have done, what anyone should have done. But that girl, Catherine Hayes, with her pale face and her courage and her devastated eyes when Doc Morrison told her the truth about her legs, she had gotten under his skin somehow. James found himself thinking about her as he went about his work the next day, wondering if she had made it through the night, wondering if there was anything more he could do to help. It was not attraction, exactly, though he had noticed that she was pretty in a refined Eastern way, with dark hair and delicate features. It was something else, some sense of responsibility or connection that he could not quite name. He rode into town after finishing his morning chores, cleaned up as best he could at the bunkhouse first, and went to Doc Morrison's office with his hat in his hands like a nervous schoolboy. The doctor's assistant, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Chen, who served as nurse and housekeeper, answered his knock. "I came to see about Miss Hayes," James said. "How she is doing? She had a difficult night, but she's awake. I'll ask if she's up for visitors." Mrs. Chen disappeared into the back of the house and returned a moment later, nodding. "She says you can come back, but don't tire her out, Mr. Cordell. She needs rest." Catherine looked smaller somehow in the daylight, propped up on pillows in the narrow bed. Someone had cleaned the dirt and blood from her face, and her dark hair was braided over one shoulder. She wore a clean white nightgown that James assumed belonged to Mrs. Chen. Despite her pallor and the shadows under her eyes, she managed a small smile when he entered. "Mr. Cordell, I was not sure I would see you again. Said I'd come by." James stood awkwardly near the door until Catherine gestured to a chair by the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was crushed by a stagecoach," Catherine said, and there was enough dry humor in her voice that James felt some of his worry ease. "But I'm alive, which is more than I had a right to expect yesterday. Thank you for that. Doc Morrison says if you had not gotten me here when you did, I likely would have died from shock and blood loss. Just did what needed doing. Most people would have ridden past. Or helped the others and left me because I was too injured to easily move." Catherine's eyes were very direct, very serious. "You saved my life, Mr. Cordell, and I will not forget that." James shifted uncomfortably. "No need for all that. I'm just glad you're on the mend." "Am I, though?" The question was quiet, almost to herself. Catherine looked down at her body beneath the blankets, at the splinted leg and the complete stillness below her waist. "I cannot feel my legs at all now. Even the sensation I had yesterday is gone. Doc Morrison says that might be the swelling or it might be permanent. He does not know. But he said it might get better. That's something. He said I'll never walk right again. Even if some feeling returns, even if I can move them at all, I'll be crippled." The word came out bitter. "Do you know what that means for someone like me, Mr. Cordell? I came out here to teach, to be independent, to have a life of my own. I cannot do any of that now. I have no family here, no resources, no way to support myself. I'll be a burden and a charity case until the day I die." James was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "Seems to me you're making a lot of decisions about your life when you're only 2 days out from a bad accident. Why don't you give yourself some time before you decide what you can and cannot do?" Catherine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Time will not change the fact that I cannot walk, Mr. Cordell. Maybe not, but it might change what you can do about it." Before Catherine could respond, Doc Morrison appeared in the doorway. "How's our patient this morning?" "Alive, barely," Catherine said. "Better than the alternative." Doc Morrison checked her pulse, examined her pupils, asked her a series of questions about her pain levels and whether she could feel various sensations. His expression grew more serious as the examination went on. "The swelling hasn't gone down as much as I'd hoped. We'll give it a few more days, keep you on bed rest and see what happens. But Miss Hayes, I need you to understand that the first few weeks are critical. Any movement, any stress on your spine right now could cause permanent damage. You need to stay absolutely still." "And then what?" "Then we see what you can do, whether you have any movement, any feeling. We work with what we have." "And if I have nothing?" Doc Morrison met her eyes with steady compassion. "Then we figure out how you live with that. Plenty of folks get on fine with disabilities, Miss Hayes. It's different and it's hard, but it's not the end of your life." After the doctor left, James stayed a while longer, talking about nothing in particular, trying to distract Catherine from the fear he could see lurking behind her eyes. He told her about Silver Ridge, about the mine and the ranches and the characters who lived in town. Told her about Samuel Hutchinson and the Double Bar S, about the cattle and horses and the vast stretches of open country. Catherine listened quietly, and James got the sense that she was grateful for the distraction, for anything that kept her mind from dwelling on her situation. "I should let you rest," he said finally, standing and putting his hat back on, "but I'll come by again if that's all right." "Why?" Catherine asked. "Why do you care what happens to me?" James thought about that. "Honestly don't know, but I do." Over the next 2 weeks, James became a regular visitor at Doc Morrison's office. He came by every day after work, sometimes staying only a few minutes if Catherine was tired or in too much pain for conversation, sometimes staying for an hour or more. He brought her things from town, books from the small lending library, newspapers, once a bouquet of wildflowers that made her smile for the first time since the accident. They talked about everything and nothing, and slowly, carefully, they began to know each other. Catherine told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a wealthy merchant who expected her to marry well and produce grandchildren and live a life of genteel uselessness. She told him about her mother's horror when Catherine announced her intention to become a teacher, about the arguments and ultimatums, and finally her father's grudging agreement to let her go west if she insisted on such foolishness. She told him how excited she had been to escape, how she had felt like her real life was finally about to begin. "And then it ended before it even started," she said quietly. "I should have listened to my mother, she was right about everything." "That's fear talking," James said, "not truth." James told her about his own past, about growing up poor in Texas with a father who drank and a mother who died young. About hitting the trail at 15 and never looking back, about the years of wandering and the jobs that ranged from legal to barely legal. He told her about gunfights he had been in, men he had killed in self-defense, close calls and narrow escapes. Catherine listened with wide eyes, this world of violence and survival so foreign to her Boston upbringing. "Weren't you scared?" she asked. "Every time." "But being scared don't mean you don't do what needs doing." "Is that what you think I should do, just push through being scared?" "I think you're tougher than you know, and I think you haven't given yourself a fair chance yet." The days crept by with agonizing slowness. Catherine remained paralyzed from the waist down, with no change in sensation or movement despite Doc Morrison's best efforts. He had her try various exercises, attempting to move her toes or flex her ankles, but nothing happened. The muscles simply would not respond. Catherine bore it all with a stoicism that broke James's heart, but he could see the hope dying in her eyes a little more each day. 3 weeks after the accident, Samuel Hutchinson himself came to visit. He was a big man in his 60s, with a leonine head of white hair and a booming voice that filled the small room. James had told him about Catherine, and Samuel, who had a soft heart beneath his gruff exterior, had come to see if there was anything he could do to help. "Terrible thing, Miss Hayes, just terrible," he said, dwarfing the chair by her bedside. "James here tells me you were coming to teach at our school. We surely do need teachers in this town. Too many children growing up wild because there's no one to educate them properly." "I'm afraid I won't be much use as a teacher now," Catherine said. "Cannot even get out of bed, much less stand in front of a classroom." "Well now, let's not give up hope just yet. Doc Morrison says it's still early days." Samuel pulled out a handkerchief and mopped his brow. "But I didn't come here to talk about that. Came to make you an offer if you're interested." Catherine looked at him warily. "What kind of offer?" "My wife passed 2 years back, and the ranch house is too big and empty for just me and the hired help. Been thinking about getting someone in to manage the household, do the cooking and such. I know you're laid up right now, but James says you're a smart woman and you need a place to go once Doc clears you out of here. So I'm offering you a job and a place to stay, room and board plus a fair wage. You can do what you're able to do, and we'll work around what you cannot do." Catherine stared at him, and James watched hope and suspicion war on her face. "Mr. Hutchinson, I appreciate the kindness, but I cannot even walk. How am I supposed to manage a household?" "There's a wheelchair in the back of Doc's office, belonged to his late wife. He's willing to let you use it. House is all on one level so you can get around. For the things you cannot reach or cannot do, we'll figure it out. I've got ranch hands who can help with the heavy work." Samuel leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Miss Hayes, I'm not offering you charity. I genuinely need help and you genuinely need a position. Seems to me we can help each other out." James had not known Samuel was planning this, but gratitude washed through him at the older man's generosity. He watched Catherine's face, saw the moment when pride warred with practicality and practicality won. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you, Mr. Hutchinson, I accept your offer." Good, we'll get you settled once Doc says you're ready to be moved, no rush, you take your time healing up." After Samuel left, Catherine was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "Did you put him up to that?" James met her eyes honestly. "No, didn't know he was going to do it, but I'm glad he did." "I don't want to be a charity case." "You're not. Samuel doesn't do charity. If he offered you a job, it's because he thinks you can do it. He's a good man, Catherine. He'll treat you fair." It was the first time James had used her given name, and something shifted between them with that small intimacy. Catherine's eyes softened and she reached out her hand. James took it, her fingers small and delicate in his calloused palm. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "How to be this person I've become. Neither do I, but we'll figure it out." Doc Morrison kept Catherine at his office for another 2 weeks, wanting to be absolutely certain she was stable before allowing her to be moved. The broken bones in her leg were healing well, though the paralysis remained unchanged. He taught her how to use the wheelchair, how to shift her weight and maneuver the wheels, and Catherine threw herself into mastering it with a determination that impressed everyone who saw her. If she could not walk, then by God, she would learn to navigate the world however she could. James was there for every small triumph and every frustrating setback. He steadied the chair when she nearly tipped it over trying to turn too sharply. He helped her figure out how to navigate doorways and uneven ground. He built a ramp for the step leading out of Doc Morrison's office so she could practice going outside. And when Catherine broke down crying one afternoon, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had lost and terrified of the uncertain future, James held her and let her sob into his shirt until she was empty. "I'm sorry," she said when she could speak again. "You must think I'm terribly weak." "I think you're the strongest person I've ever met," James said simply, and he meant it. Moving day came in late October, 6 weeks after the accident. The air had turned crisp and cool, a relief after the brutal heat of September, and the cottonwoods along the creek were starting to turn gold. Samuel Hutchinson drove a wagon into town, and James helped carry Catherine out and settle her in the back on a pile of blankets. The wheelchair was secured next to her, and Doc Morrison handed over a bag of supplies and medication along with strict instructions. "You take it easy, Miss Hayes. No trying to do too much too fast, and send for me immediately if you have any increase in pain or any changes in sensation." "I will, doctor. Thank you for everything." The Double Bar S was 5 miles outside of town, situated in a valley where a year-round creek provided water for cattle, and the house. It was a sprawling ranch house built of timber and adobe, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides and a view of the mountains that took Catherine's breath away. Samuel had been true to his word about it being all on one level, and James had spent the previous week building ramps for the steps leading up to the porch. "Welcome home," Samuel said as he helped Catherine into her wheelchair. "I've got you set up in the east bedroom, lots of morning light. Mrs. Hutchinson always liked that room best." The house was furnished comfortably if not elegantly, with sturdy wooden furniture and woven rugs, and the kind of lived-in feel that spoke of a real home rather than just a place to sleep. The kitchen was large and well-equipped, opening onto a dining room that could seat 10. Catherine's bedroom was indeed lovely, with windows that looked out over the valley and a bed piled high with quilts. Someone, probably Mrs. Chen, had thought to place everything at a height Catherine could reach from her chair. "It's wonderful," Catherine said and meant it. "Thank you, Mr. Hutchinson." Call me Samuel, please. We're not formal here. Now I'll let James show you around while I go see to some business. Supper's at 6, and Cookie's already got something on the stove. You let us know if you need anything at all. James gave Catherine a tour of the house, pointing out which rooms were which and where supplies were kept. The ranch employed half a dozen hands who lived in the bunkhouse out back, plus Cookie, who did all the cooking and was not going to be happy about losing that responsibility. But Samuel had been clear that Catherine was in charge of the household now, and what she decided went. Cookie's not going to make this easy on you, James warned. He's been here since Samuel's wife was alive and he's set in his ways. Then I'll have to convince him I'm not here to step on his toes, Catherine said, just to help where I can. Over the next few weeks, Catherine settled into life at the Double Bar S. It was not easy. There were times when her limitations frustrated her to tears, when she dropped things she could not bend down to pick up, or could not reach items on high shelves, or simply could not do tasks that required standing. But she was stubborn and determined, and she slowly found ways to adapt. She reorganized the kitchen to put commonly used items within her reach. She learned to ask for help without feeling like a burden. She discovered she could do most cooking from her chair if she planned carefully, and she took over menu planning and household accounts with an efficiency that impressed Samuel. Cookie, as predicted, was difficult at first. He was a bowlegged old man who had been cooking for Cowboys for 40 years and did not appreciate some Eastern woman trying to change his ways. But Catherine approached him with respect, asking his advice rather than giving orders, and gradually he warmed to her. They developed a system where Cookie handled the heavy work and Catherine focused on planning and seasoning, and the kinds of refined cooking that Cowboys did not usually get. Within a month, the ranch hands were declaring meals at the Double Bar S the best food they had ever eaten. James came by the ranch house every evening after work, always finding some excuse to check on Catherine. He brought her things she needed from town, helped her with projects around the house, stayed for supper and lingered afterward to talk. Samuel watched their growing friendship with knowing eyes but said nothing. He had seen the way James looked at Catherine, and he had seen the way Catherine's face lit up whenever James walked into a room. It was only a matter of time, Samuel figured, before they both realized what was happening between them. Winter came to New Mexico, cold nights and the occasional snow that dusted the mountains white. Catherine had been at the ranch for 3 months, and the paralysis remained unchanged. She could not feel or move anything below her waist, and Doc Morrison, when he came out for a checkup in December, admitted that the chances of recovery were growing slimmer with each passing month. "I'm sorry, Miss Hayes. I had hoped we would see more progress by now." Catherine took the news with the stoicism she had developed over the past months. "I understand, Doctor. Thank you for your honesty." After Doc Morrison left, Catherine sat by the window in her room and stared out at the snow-covered valley. She had adapted to her new life, had even found a strange kind of contentment in it. But there were still moments when the weight of what she had lost threatened to crush her. She would never dance again, never walk through a meadow, never feel grass beneath her feet or climb stairs or do 1,000 small things she had taken for granted her entire life. A knock on her doorframe made her turn. James stood there, hat in hand as always, snowflakes melting in his dark hair. "Heard Doc Morrison was here, wanted to see how you're doing." "The same as always, no change, no hope of change." Catherine tried to keep the bitterness out of her voice and failed. James came into the room and knelt beside her chair so they were at eye level. "What can I do?" "Nothing." "There's nothing anyone can do." "That's not true, and you know it." Catherine looked at him, this man who had saved her life and then refused to leave it, who came by every single day without fail, who had somehow become the most important person in her world. "Why do you keep coming here, James?" "What do you want from me?" "I want you to stop giving up," James said quietly. "I want you to remember the woman who was brave enough to leave everything she knew and come west by herself. I want you to fight." "Fight for what? I cannot walk, James." That's not going to change no matter how hard I fight. Maybe not, but you can still live. You can still have a life worth living. You think being in that chair means you're done. Then you're wrong. James's storm-gray eyes were intense, burning with a conviction that made Catherine's breath catch. You're one of the smartest, strongest, most capable people I've ever met. You've taken over running this entire household in 3 months. You've got Cookie eating out of your hand. You've got the ranch accounts so organized that Samuel says he's never seen his finances so clear. You've done all that from a wheelchair, Catherine. What makes you think you cannot do more? Because I'm tired, Catherine whispered and felt tears spill over. I'm so tired of pretending this is okay, of being brave, of adapting. I'm tired of being broken. James reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. You're not broken. You're bent, maybe, changed, but not broken. And you're not alone. You've got Samuel, you've got everyone here, you've got me. Why? The question came out as a sob. Why do you care so much? Because I love you, James said, and the words hung in the air between them, simple and true and terrifying. I didn't mean to, didn't plan on it. But somewhere between pulling you out of that wreck and watching you learn to navigate this world in a whole new way, I fell in love with you, Catherine Hayes, and I'm not going anywhere. Catherine stared at him through her tears, unable to speak. James loved her. This rough cowboy with his weathered hands and his steady presence and his unfailing loyalty loved her. And the most terrifying part was that she loved him too, had been falling for him for months without letting herself acknowledge it, because what was the point? What kind of life could they have together when she was like this? James, I cannot, she started, but he shook his head. Don't tell me all the reasons why not. I know them already. I know you're scared, and I know you think you're not enough like this, but you're wrong. You're everything, Catherine. Everything I never knew I was looking for. I cannot give you a normal life. I cannot even walk down the aisle at our wedding, cannot dance with you, cannot, she stopped, her face flushing, cannot be a proper wife in all the ways that matter. You can be my wife in all the ways that matter to me, James said firmly. I don't care about dancing or any of the rest of it. I care about you. About building a life together, whatever that looks like, if you want me, that is, if you feel even a fraction of what I feel. I do, Catherine whispered. I love you too, I have for a while now, but James, are you sure, really sure? Because once you commit to this, to me like this, there's no going back. You will be taking care of me for the rest of our lives. Good, James said simply. Because I plan to spend the rest of my life taking care of you anyway. Might as well make it official. He kissed her then, soft and careful, and Catherine felt something inside her chest break open. Hope, she realized. For the first time since the accident, she let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, her life was not over. Maybe it was just beginning in a way she had never expected. They were married in January 1879, in the parlor of the ranch house with Samuel and Doc Morrison and half the town in attendance. Catherine wore a dress that Mrs. Chen and several other women had sewn for her, pale blue silk that made her eyes look like sapphires. James wore his best suit, borrowed from Samuel, and he was so nervous that his hands shook when he placed the ring on Catherine's finger. Samuel gave the bride away, and Cookie made a wedding cake that was the talk of Silver Ridge for months. James carried Catherine across the threshold of their new home, a small cottage on the ranch property that Samuel had given them as a wedding present. It was just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but James had spent weeks making it perfect, building ramps and widening doorways and arranging everything so Catherine could navigate easily. He had even built raised garden beds outside so Catherine could tend plants from her chair when spring came. Their wedding night was tender and tentative, full of whispered reassurances and careful exploration. Catherine had been terrified about this part of marriage, convinced that her paralysis would make intimacy impossible or at least deeply unsatisfying for James. But James was patient and creative, and he showed her with actions rather than words that love was about so much more than the mechanics of bodies. They learned each other slowly, found ways to connect that had nothing to do with walking and everything to do with trust and tenderness, and the kind of passion that built slowly like a banked fire. "Are you happy?" Catherine asked afterward, lying in the circle of James's arms in their bed. "Happier than I've ever been in my life," James said and kissed the top of her head. "Are you?" "Yes," Catherine said and realized with wonder that it was true. "I actually am." The first year of their marriage was a time of adjustment and discovery. Catherine continued managing the household at the main ranch house, but now she had a home of her own to care for as well. James continued working at the Double Bar S, though Samuel had promoted him to foreman, recognizing his skill with horses and cattle and men. They settled into a rhythm, finding joy in small domestic moments, learning to navigate married life with all its challenges and compromises. Catherine's paralysis remained unchanged, but her attitude toward it shifted. With James's love as a foundation, she began to see her wheelchair not as a prison but as a tool, a means of maintaining independence despite her limitations. She pushed herself to do more, to go further, to refuse to let her disability define her entire existence. She started teaching again, taking on students who came to the cottage for lessons. She taught reading and writing and arithmetic to children whose parents could not afford formal schooling, and she discovered that she could be just as effective a teacher from a wheelchair as she would have been standing. James was endlessly supportive, but he also refused to coddle her. When Catherine wanted to try something new, he found ways to make it possible rather than telling her all the reasons it would not work. When she got frustrated or discouraged, he listened and sympathized, but always brought her back to what she could do rather than dwelling on what she could not. He built her a special saddle that allowed her to ride horseback, strapping her legs in place so she would not fall, and Catherine cried the first time she felt the wind in her hair again and the power of a horse beneath her. "I never thought I would do this again," she said, breathless with joy. "Told you you're not done living," James said, riding beside her on his roan gelding. "Not even close." Spring turned to summer and summer to fall. Catherine tended her garden and taught her students and managed the household accounts. James worked the ranch and broke horses and came home every evening to his wife. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing. They made plans for the future, dreams that seemed increasingly possible rather than hopelessly distant. They loved each other with a depth and intensity that surprised them both. It was in October, just over a year after the accident, that Catherine felt the first twinge of sensation in her left foot. She was sitting at the kitchen table working on lesson plans when it happened, a sudden sharp tingle like pins and needles. She gasped and looked down, not quite believing, and then it happened again. "James!" Her voice came out as a shriek. "James, come here." He came running from the barn, convinced something was wrong, and found Catherine staring at her feet with an expression of shock and wonder. "What is it? Are you hurt?" "I felt something. In my foot. I felt it, James." Catherine was almost too afraid to believe it. "Touch my foot, the left one." "Touch it?" James knelt and carefully pressed his fingers against her foot through her stocking. "Can you feel that?" "Yes, it's faint, but yes, I can feel it." They stared at each other, hardly daring to hope. "Try to move your toes," James said. Catherine concentrated, focusing every bit of will she possessed on her left foot. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, infinitesimally, her big toe moved. It was barely a twitch, hardly even movement at all, but it was there. Catherine burst into tears, and James pulled her into his arms, and they held each other while Catherine shook with sobs that were equal parts joy and terror. "What does this mean?" she asked when she could speak. "After all this time, why now?" "I don't know, but we're going to find out. We need to get you to Doc Morrison." Doc Morrison was cautiously optimistic when he examined Catherine the next day. The sensation had spread to encompass her entire left foot and part of her calf, and she could definitely move her toes, though the movement was weak and uncoordinated. "The spinal cord is an incredible thing," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "Sometimes healing happens when we least expect it. The swelling may have finally gone down enough for some nerve function to return." Or new neural pathways may have formed. I have read about such things in medical journals. Either way, Miss Catherine, this is remarkable. Will I walk again? Catherine asked, almost afraid to voice the question. I don't know. This is more recovery than I ever expected to see, but we're still talking about very limited function. You might regain more, or this might be as good as it gets. We'll have to wait and see. He looked at her seriously. In the meantime, we need to start exercises, try to strengthen whatever function you have. It's going to be hard work and it's going to take time. Are you ready for that? Yes, Catherine said without hesitation. Whatever it takes. The work was brutal. Doc Morrison taught Catherine exercises designed to strengthen her legs and retrain her nerves to communicate with her muscles. James helped her every evening, holding her steady while she attempted to move her feet and ankles, encouraging her through the pain and frustration when nothing seemed to be working. Progress was measured in millimeters, tiny victories that would have seemed meaningless to anyone who had not spent 13 months unable to move at all. After 2 weeks, Catherine could flex both feet and had sensation in both legs up to her knees. After a month, she could bend her knees slightly. After 2 months, she asked James to help her try standing. He set up parallel bars in their cottage rough wooden railings that Catherine could hold onto for support. James stood behind her, his arms around her waist, ready to catch her if she fell. Catherine gripped the bars until her knuckles turned white and tried to push herself up from the chair. The first attempt failed. So did the second and third. Catherine's legs simply did not have the strength to support her weight, and she collapsed back into the wheelchair, sobbing with frustration. I cannot do it, I'm not strong enough. Not yet, James said, but you will be, we'll try again tomorrow. They tried every day for a week before Catherine managed to stand, her legs shaking violently with the effort for all of 5 seconds before collapsing. But those 5 seconds felt like flying. James caught her before she hit the floor and Catherine was laughing and crying at the same time. I stood, did you see? I stood. I saw, you're incredible, you know that. The progress continued, agonizingly slow but undeniable. 5 seconds became 10, then 20, then a full minute. Standing became taking a shuffling step while holding the bars and leaning most of her weight on her arms. 1 step became 2, then 3. Catherine fell constantly, bruising herself despite James's best efforts to catch her, but she refused to give up. She had been given a second chance and she was going to take it. By spring of 1880, 18 months after the accident, Catherine could walk the length of the parallel bars without collapsing. Her gait was unsteady and she needed the support of the railings, but she was walking. James wanted to build longer bars to give her more distance to practice, but Catherine had a different idea. I want to try crutches. Doc Morrison fitted her with a pair of wooden crutches, adjusting them to the right height and showing her how to use them. Catherine's first attempt ended with her flat on her face, but she got up and tried again, and again, and again. James hovered anxiously, ready to catch her, until Catherine snapped at him to give her some space. I have to learn to fall safely if I'm going to do this. You cannot always be there to catch me. It was hard for James to step back to watch her struggle and fall and not intervene, but he understood she needed to do this herself to prove that she could. So he watched from a distance, his heart in his throat every time she went down, and he celebrated every small victory with her. By summer, Catherine could walk around the cottage using the crutches, though she still relied on the wheelchair for longer distances. She had to concentrate on every step, and her legs tired quickly, but she was mobile in a way she had not been since before the accident. The first time she walked outside under her own power and stood in her garden without the wheelchair, she cried tears of gratitude. I never thought I would do this again, she told James. Never thought I would feel dirt under my feet or stand in the sunshine or walk beside you. You proved everyone wrong, James said, his voice rough with emotion. You proved the doctor wrong and you proved yourself wrong. I'm so damned proud of you, Catherine. The town of Silver Ridge watched Catherine's recovery with amazement and celebration. People who had written her off as crippled for life saw her walking down the main street on crutches with her head held high, and they cheered. Children she taught ran up to hug her and marvel at how tall she was standing up. Doc Morrison declared it the most remarkable recovery he had witnessed in 40 years of practicing medicine. But Catherine knew the truth. She had not fully recovered. Her legs would never be completely normal. She walked with a pronounced limp even with the crutches, and her right leg was significantly weaker than her left. She could not walk long distances without exhaustion, could not stand for extended periods, would likely need the crutches or a cane for the rest of her life. On bad days, when the pain flared or her legs simply refused to cooperate, she still needed the wheelchair. Doc Morrison was right, she told James one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. I'll never walk right again, but I can walk. That's more than I ever hoped for. You did that, James said. You fought for every inch of recovery and you earned it. We did it, Catherine corrected. I could not have done any of this without you. You carried me when I could not walk. You held me up when I wanted to give up. You loved me when I did not think I was worthy of love. She took his hand, threading her fingers through his. You're my miracle, James Cordell, and you're mine. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned orange and pink and purple. Catherine thought about the past 2 years, about how much had changed and how much she had changed. The accident had broken her in ways that went far beyond the physical, had shattered her sense of self and her plans for the future. But in the rebuilding, she had found something she never would have discovered otherwise. She had found strength she did not know she possessed. She had found purpose and community and love. She had found James. I want a baby, Catherine said suddenly, the words surprising both of them. James turned to look at her, his expression carefully neutral. Are you sure? Doc Morrison said it might be dangerous, given your injuries. He said it might be, not that it would be, and yes, I'm sure. I want a family with you, James. I want to build a life that's about more than just surviving. I want to live. James studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Then we'll talk to Doc Morrison, make sure we know what we're getting into, and if he says it's possible, then yes. Let's have a baby. Doc Morrison was cautious but not entirely opposed. Catherine's spinal injury had been to her lower vertebrae, which meant her reproductive organs had not been directly affected. Pregnancy would put strain on her body, particularly her back and legs, and she would likely need bed rest for much of it. Labor and delivery would be complicated, possibly dangerous, but it was not impossible. You'll need constant monitoring, he said, and you need to be prepared for the possibility that this might undo some of your recovery. The weight of pregnancy could affect your mobility. I understand the risks, Catherine said, and I want to try anyway. She conceived in the fall of 1880, and the pregnancy was everything Doc Morrison had warned about and more. The additional weight made walking nearly impossible by her 4th month, and Catherine was back in the wheelchair full-time. Her back ached constantly, and there were days when the pain was so intense she could barely move. But she endured it all with the same stubborn determination she had brought to her recovery, and James was there every step of the way, caring for her with a tenderness that made her fall in love with him all over again. Their son was born in May of 1881, a healthy baby boy they named Thomas, after James's father. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Doc Morrison was genuinely afraid he would lose both mother and child. But Catherine was stronger than she looked, and she brought their son into the world with the same fierce will that had brought her back to walking. James wept when he held his son for the first time, this tiny perfect human that he and Catherine had created. He's beautiful. You're beautiful. I cannot believe you did this. We did this, Catherine said, exhausted but glowing. Together. Recovery from childbirth was slow, but within 3 months, Catherine was back on her crutches, determined to regain the mobility she had sacrificed during pregnancy. It was harder this time, her body weakened by the ordeal, but she refused to give up. She had a son who needed her, a husband who loved her, and a life that was full of purpose and meaning. She would walk again, not because she had to, but because she chose to. By the time Thomas was a year old, Catherine could walk around the house without crutches, though she used a cane for longer distances. She still had bad days when she needed the wheelchair, but they were becoming less frequent. Her doctors called it impossible. Catherine called it determination. They had a daughter 3 years later, a dark-haired little girl they named Elizabeth. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and so was the recovery. Catherine seemed to grow stronger with each passing year, as if her body had finally figured out how to work around the damage the accident had caused. She would never be completely normal, but she was mobile and independent and capable of far more than anyone had believed possible. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Thomas and Elizabeth grew up on the double bar S, learning to ride before they could walk properly, helping with chores and playing in the sunshine. Catherine taught school in the parlor of their cottage, and children from all over the valley came for lessons. James became a partner in the ranch when Samuel retired, and he ran it with Catherine's help, the two of them making all major decisions together. On a warm evening in September 1888, exactly 10 years after the accident that had changed everything, Catherine and James sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 7 now, a serious boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Elizabeth was 4, wild and fearless and utterly convinced she could do anything her brother could do. "You remember what today is?" Catherine asked. "How could I forget? 10 years since I found you bleeding in the dust and convinced myself you were going to die. 10 years since you saved my life. Since you carried me when I could not walk, since you refused to let me give up." Catherine took his hand, scarred and calloused from a lifetime of hard work. "Doc Morrison said I would never walk right again. He was correct about that, but he did not account for you, for us. You did the hard work, Catherine. You're the one who fought for every bit of recovery. I fought because you gave me something to fight for, because you loved me when I was at my lowest, when I had nothing to offer except a broken body and a stubborn heart." She stood, leaning heavily on her cane, and James stood with her. "Dance with me." "Catherine, you should not. I know I should not. Dance with me anyway." There was no music, just the evening song of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Catherine leaned most of her weight on James as they swayed together in the fading light, her cane abandoned on the porch rail. Her legs trembled with the effort of supporting her, but she did not care. She was dancing with her husband under the New Mexico sky, and it was imperfect and difficult and absolutely beautiful. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "Thank you for carrying me until I could walk again. Thank you for everything." "I love you too," James said. "And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." They danced until Catherine's legs gave out, and then James swept her into his arms and carried her into their home, their children trailing behind them, laughing. He set her gently on the sofa and sat beside her, and Catherine thought about how strange and wonderful life was. She had come west to be a teacher and had ended up a wife and mother and partner in a cattle ranch. She had lost the ability to walk and then fought her way back to mobility through sheer determination. She had been told she would never have a normal life and had promptly built a life that was extraordinary. The doctor had said she would never walk right again, and he had been correct. But Catherine had learned that walking right was not the same as walking, and walking was not the same as living. She lived fully and completely, embracing every moment, grateful for second chances and stubborn cowboys and the incredible resilience of the human body and spirit. As she sat surrounded by her family in the home she had made, Catherine Hayes Cordell smiled and thought that she would not change a single thing about her wild, imperfect, beautiful life. Not even the accident that had started it all. Years continued to unfold like pages in a well-loved book, each one bringing new challenges and joys to the Cordell family. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man who preferred books to cattle, but learned ranching anyway because it was the family business. Elizabeth remained fearless, racing her horse across the desert and climbing trees despite her mother's protests. Catherine taught 3 generations of Silver Ridge children, and some of her former students became teachers themselves, spreading her influence across the territory. In 1895, when Catherine was 39 years old, she received a letter from Boston. Her father had died, and her mother, elderly and in poor health, wanted to see her daughter one last time. Catherine had not spoken to her family in 17 years, not since leaving for the West against their wishes. The letter opened old wounds, but it also presented an opportunity for closure. "I should go," she told James, "make peace before it is too late. Then we'll go together, all of us." The journey to Boston was long and arduous, made more difficult by Catherine's mobility issues. The train accommodated her wheelchair, and James carried her when stairs made travel impossible, but by the time they reached her childhood home, Catherine was exhausted. Her mother answered the door, a tiny, frail woman who looked decades older than her 65 years. "Catherine," her voice was barely a whisper. "You came." "I came." The reunion was emotional and complicated. Catherine's mother wept when she saw her daughter walking with a cane, remembering the dire predictions from the doctor's letter Catherine had sent years ago. She wept again when she met her grandchildren and James, this rough Western man who had saved her daughter's life and loved her despite everything. Over the course of a week, Catherine and her mother talked about all the years they had lost, the misunderstandings and hurt feelings and stubborn pride on both sides. "I was so angry when you left," her mother admitted. "I thought you were throwing your life away. And then when I heard about the accident, I was certain you would come home, let us care for you. When you did not, I thought you were just being stubborn." "I was being stubborn," Catherine said, "but I was also building a life, the life I chose, not the one you chose for me. And Mother, it's a good life, I'm happy." "I can see that." Her mother reached out and took Catherine's hand. "I was wrong about so many things, wrong about the West, wrong about that cowboy of yours. You proved me wrong, and I'm glad you did." They parted on better terms than Catherine had dared hope, and the trip back to New Mexico felt like shedding a weight she had carried for years. She had made peace with her past, proved to her mother and herself that her choices had been the right ones. When the desert landscape appeared outside the train window, Catherine felt a profound sense of coming home. Samuel Hutchinson passed away in 1898, and he left the double bar S jointly to James and Catherine in his will. They were in their 40s now, and running a ranch was harder than it had been in their youth, but they hired good help and taught their children the business. Thomas, despite his bookish nature, had a gift for managing finances and turned the ranch into one of the most profitable operations in the territory. Elizabeth, when she turned 16, announced her intention to become a doctor. "I want to help people the way Doc Morrison helped you, Mama," she said. "I want to learn everything about medicine and come back here to practice." Catherine and James supported her dream, even though sending a daughter away to medical school was unusual and expensive. Elizabeth left for Philadelphia in 1901, and she wrote letters home every week describing her studies and the wonders of the modern medical world. Catherine read those letters with pride and amazement, marveling at how far women had come since her own youth. In 1902, Catherine was asked to speak at a gathering of the New Mexico Territory Women's Association. She had never considered herself particularly remarkable, had spent 24 years simply living her life and doing what needed to be done. But the women who invited her saw her differently. They saw a woman who had overcome tremendous adversity, who had refused to let disability define her, who had built a successful life on her own terms in a time and place that was not always kind to women. Catherine stood before 200 women in Albuquerque, leaning on her cane, and told her story. She talked about the accident and the paralysis and the despair. She talked about James and his steadfast love, about the hard work of recovery, about learning to walk again. She talked about marriage and children and running a ranch and teaching school. and she talked about the importance of determination and refusing to accept limitations that others tried to place on you. Doc Morrison told me I would never walk right again, she said, and he was correct. I will never walk the way I did before the accident. My gait is awkward, I tire easily, I still need a cane or sometimes a wheelchair, but I walk. I dance with my husband, I chase my children. I live fully and completely, not despite my disability but with it. Do not let anyone tell you what you cannot do. Find a way to do it anyway. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes, and afterward, dozens of women came to shake her hand and share their own stories of overcoming obstacles. Catherine realized that her life, the one she had built so carefully and stubbornly, had meaning beyond just her own happiness. She had become proof that second chances were possible, that determination and love could overcome almost anything. Elizabeth returned from medical school in 1908, one of the first female doctors in the New Mexico Territory. She set up practice in Silver Ridge, taking over from Doc Morrison, who was ready to retire at 78. Catherine could not have been more proud. Her daughter would help countless people, would make breakthroughs and save lives, would prove that women could be just as skilled as men in medicine. Thomas married a schoolteacher named Sarah in 1910, and they gave Catherine and James their first grandchild, a boy named James after his grandfather. Catherine held her grandson and thought about the full circle her life had traveled. From the broken girl who thought her life was over to a grandmother holding the next generation, it had been a journey she could never have imagined. James turned 60 in 1918, and he finally agreed to slow down and let the younger ranch hands take over most of the heavy work. He and Catherine spent their days working together in the garden, taking slow rides on horseback, sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. They had been married for 39 years and they still held hands like newlyweds. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked him one evening. "Tying yourself to a woman who could not walk." "Every single day," James said, and when Catherine looked up in shock, he was grinning. "I regret that I did not meet you sooner, that we did not have more years together, but regret marrying you, never, not for 1 second. Even when you had to carry me everywhere, even when I could not do all the things a wife should do, you did everything a wife should do. You loved me, you built a home with me, you gave me children and a life worth living. The rest was just details, Catherine. It was always just details." In 1925, 47 years after the accident that had changed everything, Catherine woke one morning to find that she could not feel her left leg. The sensation loss that had plagued her for so long had returned, creeping up from her foot over the course of several weeks. Elizabeth examined her mother thoroughly and delivered the news with professional calm but personal sorrow. "The damage to your spine is catching up with you, Mama. All those years of compensating, of forcing your body to work in ways it was not meant to, it's taken a toll. I think you're looking at losing most of your mobility again." Catherine took the news with equanimity. She was 69 years old and she had lived a fuller life than most people who had perfect health. If her body was finally giving out after all these years, well, she had earned the right to rest, but James was not ready to accept that. "You fought back once, you can do it again." "James, I'm nearly 70. I've had almost 50 years of walking when I should not have had any. I'm grateful for that, but I think it's time to accept that some battles cannot be won. I'm not ready to lose you. You're not losing me, I'm just sitting down." Catherine took his weathered hand in her own, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "You carried me until I proved the doctor wrong. You gave me the chance to walk again, to have a life I never dreamed possible, but sweetheart, I'm tired. It's time to rest." They moved back into the ranch house, which was easier to navigate with the wheelchair than their cottage had become. Thomas and Sarah and their 3 children lived in the cottage now, and Elizabeth had her own home in town. James retired completely from ranch work and devoted himself to caring for Catherine, just as he had in those first weeks after the accident so many years ago. Catherine spent her final years surrounded by love and family. She still taught, holding classes in the ranch house parlor for children who needed extra help. She still managed the household accounts and gave advice to Thomas about running the ranch. She still sat with James every evening, holding his hand and watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that never got old. On a warm September evening in 1928, exactly 50 years after the accident, Catherine asked James to take her outside. He carried her to their favorite spot on the porch, settling her in a chair with a view of the mountains and the valley spread out below. The sunset was particularly beautiful, orange and pink and gold bleeding together in the vast New Mexico sky. 50 years, Catherine said softly. Half a century since you pulled me out of that wrecked stagecoach and changed my entire life. Best day of my life, James said, meeting you. Even though I made everything harder, you made everything better, every single thing. James sat beside her and they watched the sun sink toward the horizon. I love you, Catherine Cordell. I have loved you since that first day when you were broken and bleeding and still had fire in your eyes. I will love you until the day I die and beyond. I love you too, Catherine said. Thank you for carrying me when I could not walk. Thank you for staying when anyone else would have left. Thank you for giving me a life worth living. They sat together as darkness fell and the stars came out one by one, and Catherine thought about everything that had happened in the 50 years since the accident. The pain and the struggle, yes, but also the joy and the love and the incredible satisfaction of a life well lived. She had proved the doctor wrong, had walked when she was told she never would. But more importantly, she had loved and been loved, had raised children and built a home and made a difference in the lives of everyone she touched. Catherine Hayes Cordell died peacefully in her sleep 3 weeks later, with James holding her hand. She was 72 years old, and she left behind a husband, 2 children, 7 grandchildren, and a legacy of determination and courage that would inspire generations. James lived another 5 years, running the ranch with Thomas and spending time with his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He never remarried, never even considered it. He had found his great love, his once-in-a-lifetime person, and nothing could replace that. He was buried beside Catherine in the Silver Ridge Cemetery, under a headstone that read, James Cordell, loving husband and father. He carried her until she proved them all wrong. The cottage they had shared became something of a landmark in Silver Ridge. Elizabeth turned it into a clinic for people with disabilities, providing care and encouragement and proof that life did not end with injury or illness. The garden Catherine had tended was maintained by her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and every spring, it bloomed with wildflowers that would have made her smile. The story of the cowboy and the teacher became local legend, passed down through generations. It was a tale of love conquering all obstacles, of determination triumphing over despair, of second chances and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Parents told it to their children as inspiration when things got hard. Doctors told it to their patients who thought recovery was impossible. It became part of the fabric of Silver Ridge, a reminder that miracles could happen when love and stubbornness combined in equal measure. And on September evenings, when the sunset painted the sky in colors too beautiful for words, people swore they could see 2 figures on the porch of the old Cordell Ranch. A man and a woman sitting close together, holding hands and watching the light fade from the day. The doctor had said she would never walk right again, and he had been correct. But she had walked, she had danced. She had lived fully and loved completely, and in the end that was all that mattered. The cowboy had carried her until she proved him wrong, and together they had built a love story that would last forever.